Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 1, Day 2. Today, we're going to be talking about Europe and the Columbian Exchange. So, why did Europeans come to North America? Why did North America suddenly become of interest to Europeans to come and visit? Why did they start looking for North America? And basically, just why did they want to come here? So, you're going to start today. You're going to have a primary source analysis to do where you're looking at primary sources and then answering these two questions for each of them. So, why exploration and colonization? One, there was a lack of land over in Europe. From 1450 to 1550, you're going to see that 90% of the European population were peasants. And during this time, there was the system of primogeniture, which basically meant that all land was bestowed to the eldest son in a family. So if the patriarch of the family died, the oldest son would get it. What this meant, too, is that there was a lack of land, because if you think about if the parents had multiple children, then what would happen to the other children? Where would they go? They'd probably stay on that land, but it would be owned by the eldest son. So during this time, you're going to see that in England passes the Enclosure Acts, which allowed fencing of open fields and common land in England and Wales. So before this, all of the land had basically just been kind of a free-for-all if you wanted to work that land. With the Enclosure Acts, now property owners could actually fence in these open fields and that kind of stuff, which meant that there was less land for peasants and other people to work on. So, one, lack of land in Europe. Two, the influence of religion and religious conflict. If you remember, going back in history, of course, the Roman Catholic Church had a ton of power in Western European society. It was really kind of like the religion and government. It had culture, authority, discipline over everything. Then you have the Reformation happen, which challenges the Roman Catholic Church, with Martin Luther specifically standing up to them, especially in England and Germany. So with the Reformation, again, you have that split in Christianity where you have Protestantism and Catholicism. And with that, you're going to have the conflict between those two sides. Even going farther than that, of course, England would eventually turn to Anglicanism and create their own version of Roman Catholicism in response to Henry VIII not being able to get a divorce. And with that, that is going to cause issues in England. So with that, you're going to have people wanting to leave, such as the Puritans, who want to leave England because they are butting heads with the Catholic Church or with the Anglican Church in England during this time. Also, you have some groups that had a desire to spread Christianity. The Spanish were really big in wanting to spread Christianity into new areas. The French also felt very strongly about sharing religion. Depending on where you went in the English colonies, they had the same desire as well. You'd also have the influence of the Renaissance. Civil humanism became very popular, which is basically where you celebrate public service and service to the state. And with that, it basically pushed almost like a form of nationalism where foreign and domestic trade was encouraged because you were seen as a way of helping the state and helping your country. And like I said there, this led to a form of nationalism where you're going to see that nationalism, economic motivations melded together, and where people saw it as very important at promoting the state and promoting their country. There was this pride that you had in the area that you were from, and you were trying to do the best for your country. Also, four, money and power. Everything really, in the end, comes back to money and power in some way. You'd have the price revolution, which would be caused by the Spanish. That would lead to a lot of inflation throughout Europe, which again would leave people to look to go elsewhere. Mercantilism would encourage manufacturing and trade in order to ensure security. So that's why you're going to see with this idea of mercantilism would eventually become that the colonies should benefit the mother country. So that's why you're going to start to see Spain and France and the Dutch and the French and the English all looking at elsewhere so that they can get raw materials and that kind of thing, because they wanted to help build up their country and make it more powerful. Also, because of the Spanish exploring, that led to the English, French, and Dutch all desiring to explore as well because they didn't want to fall behind. Plus, with the Spanish exploring, and you see that they start finding massive amounts of gold in South America and in Mexico, that is what's going to lead the other countries to get interested as well, because basically they did not want to fall behind. Also, five, expanding trade. So, of course, we all know the story of Columbus and his desire for new routes for trade in Asia, and that's going to be the desire of a lot of people as they were looking for new routes and new ways to trade with Asia. You will see in the 15th century during this time is when you start to have the beginning of the slave trade. The Portuguese would start trading for slaves in West Africa, and usually these slaves would be used to work sugar plantations on the African coast. Of course, eventually we know that the slave trade would go on to incorporate North and South America and moving those slaves to there. And because of the profitability that the Portuguese had in that area, that is what led other countries to look to do the same, because all these countries had interacted with Africa in some way. It's just in the 15th century that you start to see this transition to slavery. And part of that is due, again, to money. Part of that is due to an excess of people, meaning that African tribes would take over another African tribes, and then they would usually take all the men from that tribe and then sell them into slavery within Africa. And then that goes to incorporate these European countries as well. Now, of course, enslaved Africans did resist in whatever ways they could, but you'll see in a lot of ways it really didn't matter in the end. Despite their resistance, you're still going to have a lot of people be put into slavery. All right, the Columbian Exchange. So what was the Columbian Exchange? Basically, this is the transfer of goods between Europe and the Americas. And you can see on this chart here, which shows the goods that are going between the two places there, North America, and then from North America to Europe, and then back. And I'm always astonished by some of the things that you see. If you think about, like in Europe, they didn't have corn or potatoes before their interaction with North America. Going the other way, if you see, like here in North America, there were no horses, there were no cattle, there were no pig. I mean, what would we do without the bacon? So yeah, it's kind of crazy to see the transfer of these things. So the Columbian Exchange would be important because it would lead to a European population growth. Because, again, you're having more food coming in. People can have somewhat healthier diets. So that leads to a population growth for that. Also, new sources of mineral wealth, such as gold, which you're going to see with the Spanish. That would be really, really big with them. Now, with the Columbian Exchange, you are going to see that this is going to lead to a shift from feudalism to capitalism within Europe, because basically it's going to have the effect of helping raise the standard of living for everybody within Europe, because they're bringing all these new goods in, which opens up more and more opportunity for people to engage in a capitalist system versus this old feudalistic style of economy. So which continent would benefit the most from the exchange? Really, I think a lot of that it's up to your own evaluation when you look at this and look at the products that would go between the two. Really, for me, I would say that Europe would benefit the most, especially when you look at what happened here in North America and South America to the native groups that were here with the diseases that were brought over that really wiped out pretty much all their society. I would say that in the end, Europe really benefited the most from this system. All right, so what facilitated the Columbian Exchange? So another reason you're going to have more people come to North America is because of some improvements that would happen and some other changes that would happen. One of them being improvements in maritime technology. So basically what they were using on ships improved as far as like compass and navigation and all of that. There's specifics with that that you can mention. Again, really navigation was the big thing that improved during this time. So you have that. Two, more organized methods for conducting internal trade or international trade. So, for example, you would have the advent of the joint stock company, which basically meant that instead of having one person fully responsible with financing a trip, now you would have multiple people coming together in order to finance these trips. Basically, a joint stock company is pretty much like a corporation is today as far as having multiple investors. That's what that was. So both of these changes help drive changes to the economies within Europe and the Americas. You see here in Virginia, the Jamestown colony would start as a result of the effort of joint stock companies. All right, so to end out today, you are going to do a reading here comparing and contrasting the views of Juan Gines de Sepulveda and Bartolomé de las Casas and see what their differing views were on how the natives would be treated. Because we tend to look back and assume that all Europeans just wanted to kill and get rid of the natives, but there were dissenting voices, pretty strong dissenting voices against the treatment of natives here. So read and check those out. And then also, you need to watch Crash Course episode number 1. And this video can be found, and you can watch that as well. So really quickly talking about Spanish colonization, you have Columbus. And Columbus is one of these people that today a lot of people look at him as a villain, but a lot of Italians look at him as a hero. So Columbus, with the backing of the Spanish crown, would sail west looking for the Indies. And he was celebrated for reaching the other side of the Atlantic, but a lot of people were disappointed because when he came here, he didn't have any luck really finding gold or spices, and he still had not found a simple path to get to the Indies. So now the reason that people see Columbus as a villain is because of his treatment of the natives, and because what we know now happened to the natives that were here in the New World. Most historians, though, agree that he is still a very, very important character because of his skills as a navigator, and because he is kind of considered responsible for permanently connecting the entire world for the first time in human history. So that's why he is seen as so important because of that, and because of his connecting the world together. Now, what was the Spanish goals for colonization? Their goals were colonization and conversion. They wanted to make permanent colonies here, but they also wanted to convert the natives to Christianity. So in the 1560s, you're going to see their main goal was to prevent other Europeans from establishing settlements. And you're even going to see this later on when Jamestown is founded in 1607. One of the big concerns from the Jamestown colony was that the Spanish would find the colony and kill everybody that was there. So if you've ever been to Jamestown or looked at the location of it, it actually is up the James River a bit at a bend in the river. And that was done for strategic importance so that way they would be able to withdraw farther inland if the Spanish were to attack. And they actually had, the English had at Point Comfort out on the Chesapeake Bay. They had a lookout there so that they could quickly be able to get information back to the Jamestown colony in case the Spanish did show up. So there was a lot of concern about the Spanish doing this. In 1563, the Spanish would found St. Augustine, which would be the first permanent European settlement here in the New World. We often make a big deal about Jamestown because it was the first permanent English settlement, but St. Augustine was the first permanent European settlement. You'll see that Franciscan missionaries, Spanish missionaries, they were responsible for a lot of mission work here. And you're going to see, for the most part, the natives would tolerate the Franciscans. But once the prayers and that kind of things, the Christian prayers, did not work for them, and they started experiencing like diseases and drought and that kind of thing, that is what led the Indians to kind of turn their backs on the Spanish, because they said, hey, we're fine with this as long as it works, but if it's not working, then we aren't happy with you being here. Now, the encomienda system, what this was set up by the Spanish, and these were, the encomienda were royal grants that gave Spanish conquistadors legal control of labor of the native populations. So, of course, what would this lead to? This is going to lead to the Indians being used as basically slaves here in the New World. Now, the Spanish are unique in that, because you're going to see in North America, or in the English colonies and the French colonies, they did not use the natives as slave labor, mostly because they died so frequently due to diseases. But the encomienda system for the Spanish set up this legal system where the Spanish conquistadors were in control, and they were the ones that could enslave these natives. Now, the idea behind all of this was that the Spanish would help care for the Indians and Christianize them, but in reality, this wouldn't really be the case. Really, it was a system of slavery for the natives. So, would native labor be enough? No, it would not be. Again, we talked about the issue with natives dying because of disease. So you're going to start to see European traders start to partner with these West African groups who practice slavery in order to bring slave labor to the Americas. The Spanish would import enslaved Africans to labor on their plantations. You'll eventually see the Portuguese do the same thing. In fact, the first slaves, or who they believe slaves, the first African Americans to come into the Jamestown colony here in 1619, or into the Virginia colony, were actually captured from a Portuguese ship. So Spanish society in North America, you're going to see that the Spanish did have a caste system. The two things that I focus on very much, you're going to see near the bottom of the caste system here, you have the mestizos and the mulattoes. What the mestizos were, these were people of mixed Native American and European descent. So mixed Indians and Europeans. The mulattoes were people that were mixed African and European descent. And these two groups, again, are going to be at the bottom of the scale, slightly above the natives and the Africans, but they are going to be treated differently. Even though they are that mix between the two sides, they would be treated differently with that. Mestizos, really, that is kind of only a Spanish thing. Again, the Spanish are the ones that really intermarry quite frequently, or intermingle, I should say, with the natives. You didn't really see that very much in the English and the French colonies. Mulattoes is a term that you will hear used here in Virginia and in the English colonies once you have slave owners and slaves start to intermingle with Europeans here. So, what was the effect of the Spanish exploration and conquest? You see, the Spanish would be very successful in Florida and New Mexico, but it was very, very expensive. You would have the spread of disease, which we have mentioned, that would kill natives, and you'd have the introduction of crops and animals not found in the Americas, which would, in some cases, have a positive effect on the natives. You're going to see that certain native groups become very, very quickly accustomed to having the horse introduced, and were able to use that to their advantage in warfare and the such. You will hear, we'll talk about the Pueblo Revolt, which is going to be a revolt against the Spanish, and how that helped save a lot of Native American culture, especially within New Mexico there. So the last thing, again, asking this question, going back to what we were talking about yesterday, history really depends on the storyteller. And you're going to see that based on how you tell history and your viewpoint, it's going to be different. So much like news channels today, you're going to see news is presented through the bias of the news outlet. The same is true of history. Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, or Osama bin Laden, their view of history going to be a whole lot different than our view of history. And it's going to be the same when we're talking about the history of colonization. Obviously, the natives have a lot different view than the Europeans. The natives might view the Europeans as terrorists coming in here, taking their land, and because of the death and everything with that. So just remember, again, I'll remind you that frequently, history depends on who is telling it and who is what their view of history is to that point. So again, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic day.